It was early morning on November 9th, 1979, deep inside the NORAD command center, buried deep beneath Cheyenne Mountain. The fresh shift was still settling in, half the crew yawning, the other half squinting at blinking terminals. A technician dropped into his seat, scanning the exercise schedule. Something wasn't right. The system lagged, screens hung mid-refresh, and the simulation module refused to load. Someone muttered, quote, "Try the J-tape." He grabbed it without thinking. A worn reel, labeled in faded marker. He'd seen it used in training runs before. No one told him not to. He slid it into the reader, keyed in the command, and watched the data start feeding through. But something was wrong. The usual simulation tags didn't appear. The interface wasn't in test mode. Warning lights lit up the board. Then the numbers climbed. 200, 2200 incoming warheads detected. The alarm rang, and that could only mean one thing. The J-tape was about to change the world. The evolution of warning signs. By the late 1950s, as Soviet and American missiles proliferated across continents and beneath oceans, Pentagon strategists faced a chilling equation: detect a nuclear launch within minutes or lose the ability to respond at all. The first answer emerged as the Ballistic Missile Early Warning System, or BMEWS, 3 massive radar installations perched at the top of the world in Alaska, Greenland, and the United Kingdom. These sentinels, built around AN/FPS-50 surveillance radar sets with 400-foot reflector screens, could detect objects 3,000 miles away, providing commanders with roughly 15 minutes between the sinking moment of realization and impact, just enough time to authenticate, alert, and act. But only barely. Reality quickly exposed the system's flaws. In 1960, BMEWS operators at Thule, Greenland, detected what appeared to be dozens of incoming Soviet missiles. As alert protocols activated, someone realized the culprit was considerably less threatening: radar reflections bouncing off the rising moon. Crisis was averted, but the lesson was clear. False positives were baked into the system's code. As missile technology evolved, America's detection network mushroomed in complexity. Over-the-horizon radar arrays employed forward scatter techniques to detect atmospheric disturbances from missile launches, compressing warning time to 5 to 7 minutes. The Navy's 474N system provided even shorter notification, approximately 3 minutes for submarine-launched missiles fired from just offshore, barely time to process the information, let alone respond. When radar proved insufficient against increasingly sophisticated weapons, America's watchful eyes moved to orbit. The Defense Support Program, or DSP, deployed a constellation of satellites equipped with infrared telescopes designed to detect the unmistakable heat signatures of missile launches. Operating from geosynchronous orbit 22,300 miles above Earth, these satellites could distinguish between single test launches and full-scale attacks, track trajectories in real time, and provide commanders with 25 to 30 minutes of warning for launches from Soviet territory, a relative eternity in nuclear response terms. Complementing these technological shields, diplomatic channels created their own safeguards. The Washington-Moscow hotline, established in 1963, provided an encrypted teletype connection designed to prevent miscommunication during crises. But no amount of redundancy could eliminate the possibility of system failure. No time for rational thought. Inside Cheyenne Mountain, a fortress blasted into solid granite, reinforced with 25-ton blast doors and 4,600 tons of steel. Engineers integrated these disparate warning systems into a centralized command structure. The 425,000-square-foot underground complex housed a unified operations center where technicians could simultaneously monitor input from every radar station, satellite feed, submarine tracking system, and communication circuit in the network. The complex now relied on the WIMAX-2, or Worldwide Military Command and Control System Information System computer network, a maze of IBM 360-65 mainframes running custom software designed to process and correlate data from multiple detection platforms. The system's primary advantage, centralized analysis, was also its Achilles heel. Corrupted data could potentially cascade through the entire warning architecture. By 1979, America's nuclear tripwire had grown into a technological colossus. Multiple semi-automatic ground environment, or SAGE direction centers, processed radar data. The Ballistic Missile Defense Center in Colorado Springs funneled satellite information into the command post. The AN/FSS-7 radar network scanned for submarine launches. But despite these redundancies, false alarms continued to plague the system. Each incident exposed the fundamental paradox of nuclear warning. As detection time decreased, so did opportunities for verification. Nuclear security expert and author of the 1993 book The Logic of Accidental Nuclear War, Bruce Blair, puts it, quote, "It's really a very, very tightly scripted operation that allows absolutely no room for mistake, allows very little time for rational thought." Once a threat registered on monitoring systems, standardized protocols activated across the command network. NORAD commanders had mere minutes to evaluate before notifying the Pentagon's National Military Command Center, or NMCC. From there, alerts would flash to Strategic Air Command headquarters at Offutt Air Force Base in Nebraska and eventually reach the White House Situation Room. The protocol was technologically sophisticated, but fundamentally vulnerable to the most unpredictable component in any complex system: human beings. 2,000 warheads. The morning of November 9th, 1979, NORAD's Combat Operations Center inside Cheyenne Mountain hummed with routine activity. Suddenly, monitoring screens throughout the facility bloomed with urgent alert indicators. The WIMAX system displayed the nightmare scenario every operator dreaded. Soviet SS-19 and SS-18 intercontinental ballistic missiles rising from silos across the USSR, heading toward American cities. The command center transformed in seconds. Warning lights flashed crimson across consoles. Klaxons wailed through reinforced chambers. Officers who had trained for this moment their entire careers now faced what appeared to be the beginning of humanity's final war. The watch commander barked the order to confirm through secondary systems, his voice unnaturally calm despite the chaos erupting around him. This was no drill. This was DEFCON territory. As Blair explains the psychological toll of being in such a position, quote, "Imagine if you were in the hot seat at NORAD. And really, this was your only job for the rest of your life. And it could only happen one time, and that's that. If the enemy launched a sudden attack, you have 3 or 4 minutes to find out what's going on and to notify the president, and brief the president when he comes on the line of what you know about that attack. And oh, by the way, don't make any mistakes." Operators frantically cross-checked the alerts with other detection platforms. Urgent queries shot to radar stations and satellite control centers across the globe. The responses proved puzzling. PAVE-PAWS phased array radar installations showed clear skies. DSP satellites detected no heat signatures from missile launches. Seismic monitors registered no ground disturbances associated with large-scale silo openings. Every secondary system contradicted what WIMAX displayed with such alarming certainty. Yet the primary screens remained adamant. First 250 missiles, then an escalating count reaching 2,200 warheads. A full-scale decapitation strike aimed at obliterating America's leadership and retaliatory capability. Inside the Pentagon's National Military Command Center, the Deputy Director of Operations stared at the conflicting data with mounting frustration. Lieutenant General Bruce Brown, who worked at the command center, later relayed the director's fateful words, quote, "If somebody can't explain this to me in 30 seconds, I'm convening a missile attack conference." His hand moved toward the dedicated phone that would bring the Secretary of Defense and President Carter into emergency consultation, the final step before nuclear release orders. 3 minutes from Armageddon. National Security Advisor Zbigniew Brzezinski's slumber was broken at approximately 3 a.m. as his secure STU-2 telephone erupted with its distinctive ring. Military Watch Officer William Odom's voice carried the weight of apocalypse. NORAD was tracking multiple missile launches from Soviet territory. Intelligence suggested a massive first strike was underway. In that frozen moment between sleep and full awareness, Brzezinski processed the unthinkable with surprising clarity. According to American intelligence analyst Robert M. Gates' account in his 1996 book, From the Shadows, quote, "Sitting alone in the middle of the night, Brzezinski had not awakened his wife. Brzezinski's calculation was brutally simple. If this was genuine, Why force his wife to spend her final moments in terror? Let her depart this doomed planet peacefully, in her sleep. Instead, Brzezinski imposed a self-discipline that would ultimately save millions. He established a personal countdown, 3 minutes before he would place the fateful call to President Carter. This wasn't protocol. It was Brzezinski's improvised safeguard against precipitous action. He demanded one final verification before waking the commander-in-chief and setting in motion the machinery of nuclear response. Striking back. Meanwhile, the military response machinery had already lurched into motion. At Andrews Air Force Base, the E-4B National Emergency Airborne Command Post, the converted Boeing 747 Doomsday plane designed to keep the president airborne during a nuclear exchange, started its 4 massive engines and began taxiing, even without the commander-in-chief aboard. Across Strategic Air Command bases, B-52 Stratofortress bombers loaded with nuclear payloads began pre-launch preparations. Crews raced to aircraft. Engines spooled up. Nuclear weapons officers reviewed target packages and authentication codes. 1/3 of America's bomber fleet, approximately 70 aircraft, reached ready status within minutes. Each carried multiple short-range attack missiles and gravity bombs, totaling megatons of destructive power. In missile silos scattered across the Great Plains, launch crews received preliminary alerts. Minuteman III ICBMs, each topped with 3 multiple independently targetable re-entry vehicles carrying W-78 nuclear warheads of 335 kilotons each, were placed on elevated alert status, one step away from launch preparation. From tactical air command bases in Canada and the northern United States, 10 F-106 Delta Dart interceptors thundered into the sky, afterburners glowing against the morning light as they climbed to defensive positions. The pilots understood their mission was largely symbolic. Fighters couldn't intercept ballistic missiles, but scrambling was standard protocol for nuclear alerts. Strategic Air Command headquarters at Offutt Air Force Base issued orders elevating forces to DEFCON 3, a significant escalation from the normal peacetime operations of DEFCON 5 toward war footing. At this alert level, Air Force units achieved maximum readiness. Nuclear-armed bomber crews sat strapped in cockpits, and missile crews stood by for launch orders. The alternate National Military Command Center, buried beneath Raven Rock Mountain in Pennsylvania, the Pentagon's backup if Washington were destroyed, activated its full emergency protocols. Staff officers prepared to assume command continuity if the primary leadership were eliminated. And deep inside NORAD, a simulation tape, mistakenly fed live, was driving it all. The J-tape. In Washington, Brzezinski received the second update from Odom. NORAD now reported 2,200 missiles inbound. The situation had apparently escalated from limited strike to full-scale attack. Brzezinski hovered over the secure phone that would connect him directly to President Carter's bedroom. 1 minute remained in his self-imposed countdown. The National Security Advisor's mind raced through the implications. If this alert were genuine, the president would have approximately 7 minutes to decide whether to launch America's nuclear arsenal in retaliation. The single integrated operational plan, the master blueprint for nuclear war, would present Carter with limited options, primarily centered around massive counterstrikes against Soviet military and leadership targets. If fully executed, America's response would launch approximately 1,700 strategic nuclear warheads within 30 minutes. Soviet casualties would number in the tens of millions. Global environmental destruction would follow. And yet hesitation meant risking a scenario where Soviet warheads eliminated America's ability to retaliate at all. With seconds to spare before making the call to the president, Brzezinski's phone rang again. General Odom was back on the line, his voice no longer steady. This time, he said the data didn't add up. Pave paused the DSP satellites over the horizon radar. None of them showed any Soviet launches. At NORAD, operators had finally identified the source of the phantom attack. Robert Gates described the revelation, quote, "It had been a false alarm. Someone had mistakenly put military exercise tapes into the computer system." It appeared that someone had mistakenly inserted a training tape into the operational system, specifically the J-tape, designed to simulate a massive Soviet first strike as part of a wargame exercise. This simulation, created to train operators to recognize attack patterns, had somehow been fed into WIMAX's live environment. The computer system treated the simulation data as reality and automatically triggered alert protocols across the military's nuclear command structure. There were no fail-safes preventing the training scenario from activating actual emergency responses, a catastrophic design flaw that nearly triggered genuine nuclear launches in response to fictional threats. Bruce Brown later received an understated call about the incident from a command director. As Brown recalled, quote, "The hotline at my desk to the command center rang, and I picked it up, and it was a command director who said, we just had this little event happen, but it's over now, and everything's taken care of, and don't worry about it." And I said, "Okay, thank you very much," and hung up. The nonchalant delivery masked how close humanity had come to self-destruction. Investigation confirmed what had been supposed. Technicians had been attempting to run a routine training module when they encountered technical difficulties. Someone suggested using the J-tape instead, never anticipating it would interface with operational systems. This simple human error, combined with inadequate system isolation between training and operational environments, had brought the world to the brink of nuclear war. As NORAD realized the catastrophic mistake, cancellation orders spread through the command network with the same efficiency that had just activated war protocols. Fighters banked back to base. Bomber crews powered down engines. Alert status indicators reset from red to green. The entire crisis had lasted exactly 6 minutes. 6 minutes during which civilization had unknowingly stood at the precipice of annihilation. Had Brzezinski called President Carter, had the Pentagon convened a missile attack conference, had Soviet early warning systems detected American bombers scrambling and misinterpreted the activity as the first phase of an attack, the chain reaction might have become unstoppable. Explanations, excuses, and accusations. The Pentagon initially attempted to bury the incident under layers of classification, but containment proved impossible. Major airfields had already received emergency notifications clearing runways for strategic aircraft. At Dulles International Airport, a reporter in the control tower overheard communications about a major national security alert. Within 48 hours, the New York Times published a detailed reconstruction exposing how a false missile warning had activated substantial portions of America's nuclear war machinery, including the scrambling of nuclear-capable aircraft and elevated alert status for missile forces. White House Press Secretary Jody Powell publicly downplayed the incident, dismissing media concerns as overblown. His cavalier attitude only intensified congressional scrutiny and international alarm. The Soviet response arrived with uncharacteristic emotional intensity. On November 14th, General Secretary Leonid Brezhnev dispatched an urgent message to President Carter that abandoned diplomatic niceties for blunt alarm. It stated, quote, "Mr. President, I think it's quite understandable that the said fact should cause a feeling of extreme anxiety in the mind of every state leader who's responsible for the policy of his country. It's reported that an unforeseen error has occurred. Let it be so. But a false signal of nuclear missile attack did take place, and this is fraught with tremendous danger." The Soviet leader drove his point home with chilling clarity, adding, quote, "What kind of mechanism is it which allows the possibility of such incidents? I think you will agree that there should be no errors in such matters. They must be completely excluded, not 99, but 100%. Washington's response proved jarringly dismissive. The Defense Department characterized the Soviet complaint as, quote, "inaccurate and unacceptable." Soviet officials expressed open frustration at America's seemingly glib attitude toward near catastrophe. However, State Department advisor Marshall Shulman appeared troubled by the Pentagon's stance, later stating, quote, "False alerts of this kind are not a rare occurrence. There's a complacency about handling them that disturbs me." Crisis of confidence. The Pentagon's investigation quickly traced the incident to a NORAD officer's mistaken insertion of the training tape into the operational system. Many in the public, however, viewed this as an attempt to scapegoat one individual and deflect attention from deeper systemic failures. More disturbing was the discovery that engineers couldn't replicate the exact failure mode in controlled testing, suggesting deeper architectural flaws in the warning network that weren't fully understood. For NATO's military leadership, the false alarm created an operational crisis. General Bernard Rogers, Supreme Allied Commander Europe, acknowledged that the incident undermined trust in American decision-making, while simultaneously demonstrating the need for faster response options as Soviet missile technology improved. NATO allies responded with a mixture of horror and diplomatic restraint when details emerged about how close America had come to initiating nuclear war by accident. West German Chancellor Helmut Schmidt privately conveyed grave concerns about command procedures that could activate nuclear forces without Allied consultation. British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher demanded a comprehensive briefing from the Carter administration, emphasizing that false alerts affecting NATO territory required immediate notification protocols. French President Giscard d'Estaing cited the incident as proof that nuclear sovereignty couldn't be delegated, telling his defense minister it validated France's independent deterrent and stricter alert protocols. As the immediate crisis faded, it was clear this system was in dire need of being overhauled. Mistakes learned. The November 1979 false alarm wasn't an isolated glitch. In the first half of 1980, U.S. early warning systems experienced multiple follow-up failures. A minor false alert occurred on May 28th, followed by 2 serious incidents on June 3rd and 6th. In both June cases, corrupted NORAD data showed false missile counts, values like 2 or 200 instead of 0. The cause? A failed 46-cent integrated circuit and flawed formatting in the 266 communication processor. These minor defects nearly triggered strategic escalation. Emergency procedures activated immediately. Bomber crews ran to their aircraft. Engines powered up. Pacific Command launched its Blue Eagle airborne command post. DEFCON 3 was declared. Unlike November, NORAD didn't scramble interceptors, suggesting some procedures had improved. Crucially, satellite and radar sensors showed no Soviet launches, allowing a stand down within minutes. The wave of false alarms prompted a rapid overhaul of nuclear command protocols. Engineers physically separated training and operational systems, inserting hardware air gaps to prevent simulation data from contaminating live channels. Training tapes were now color-coded, sealed, and required multi-level authorization. Software architecture was redesigned. Warning data required confirmation from 2 independent sensors before triggering alerts, replacing OR logic with AND. New doctrine prioritized accuracy over speed. Authentication layers were added between NORAD and top-level command. Detection and assessment roles were split, assigning dedicated officers to verify incoming data independently. Congress, alarmed by the systemic vulnerabilities, ordered a full technical review under Presidential Directive 59. The classified report identified numerous single points of failure. Redundant pathways were installed across critical systems, and legacy IBM mainframes were upgraded for security. Training shifted toward skepticism. Operators were taught to challenge initial alerts, not just execute. Psychological screening emphasized judgment under pressure. The Soviet test. The November 1979 incident found a chilling Soviet parallel 4 years later, when Lieutenant Colonel Stanislav Petrov faced an almost identical false alarm. On September 26, 1983, Soviet satellite early warning systems detected what appeared to be 5 American missile launches headed towards Soviet territory. Computer screens flashed warnings. Alert protocols activated. Petrov had minutes to determine whether to report an incoming American attack. Like Brzezinski, Petrov chose skepticism over automation. The pattern didn't make sense. Why would Americans launch only 5 missiles in a first strike? Ground radar showed nothing. Against explicit regulations, Petrov declared the alert false, correctly identifying a system malfunction where sunlight reflecting off high-altitude clouds confused Soviet satellites' infrared sensors. Together, these incidents demonstrated that both superpowers had constructed nearly identical warning systems with similar vulnerabilities. Despite Cold War rhetoric about technological superiority, both nations faced the same fundamental challenge: distinguishing genuine attacks from system anomalies within minutes. What ultimately saved the world on November 9, 1979, wasn't technology, but human doubt. Brzezinski pausing before calling the president, operators trusting backup systems, and commanders demanding verification before executing irrevocable orders. General Odin summed up the dangers had these steps not been taken, warning that, quote, "This is no way to go to war. This has surrendered political choice to the machinery." 3 minutes of doubt saved civilization. Next time, we might not be so lucky.